also, what are some surprising life pivots you have seen
Mm,
people make?
yes, beautiful. Yeah,
Some
here's an
mirror.
example. Yeah, this is someone I used to work in consulting with, and
Yeah.
we worked through some very like difficult times. We worked during the pandemic, and we were working with some very complicated, very challenged government organizations. And so me and this former colleague, we, kind of seen a lot together, right? And then our professional paths split, and then when I started doing coaching work, he reached back out and he says, Misha, I saw, what you're doing now, and it really resonated because, he says, I also just left consulting and I moved to a different country and I'm recently a father, and, I am feeling a lot of pressure to go back to that work, you know, and
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
so, okay, right? Like again, let's understand sort of the reality and the urgency of the situation, right? Like, are you out of money? Do you need to be like working right now, right? And he says, no, we're okay. But there's this voice in my head, my father's voice, who says you need to be working, right? And we say, okay, let's recognize that
Yeah.
voice,
Yeah.
right? And also nice work. It's not your voice, it's your father's voice, right? Your father wants the best for you, but also your father is
Yeah.
not the one living your life, right? And let's remind ourselves that you are right now safe. You are right now secure, right? And, so that was helpful, right? This is all within a single kind of coaching conversation. And we keep going, and
Yeah.
I say,
Yeah.
like, imagine, give yourself permission to not go to work right away. And I think some of this pressure also was coming from his wife, and some of that pressure also was coming from him because
Yeah.
that's all he kind of has known, right? And part of the work is like
Yeah.
kind of what I was saying before, establishing some safety, that it's okay to ask what if kinds of questions, right? And so what if you didn't have to go back to work? He's like, okay, well, I could, get used to that, or I can imagine that maybe for a little bit, maybe for a few months. Okay. And then I said, well,
Yeah.
what, what would you do if you didn't have to work? And I also, because we've worked together, I know this person. This is not a person who like just sits there, They need to be moving, they need to be active, they need to be
Yeah.
productive, right?
Constant on the
And
go. Yeah.
so part of what I kind of help them see is, look, you've been working. You've been working all these years, right? Job to job, project to project. You know how to work. You have all these changes happen. You moved, you left your work, you're a wife, right? You're a father. This is a very rare opportunity, right? And I think the clients that are most receptive are the clients who are already finding themselves in a kind of process of change, right? And often a process of change that's not motivated by them. Suddenly change starts happening to them, right? And
Yeah.
so it can be destabilizing. And our kind of impulse is to try to get back to how things were as quickly as possible, right? The growth work, right? It's like, okay, look, hi, everything's okay. You have a little savings, everything's okay, everything's okay. And also, guess what? How cool is this that you are in this moment of change, right? And they go, oh yeah, there is
Yeah.
there is a kind of window, right?
Yeah.
And so let's honor
Yeah.
this window, right? This little opening. Um, and
Yeah.
what, right? Imagine that you don't have to go to work for a few months. What would you do, right? What would feel exciting? What would be a thing that would bring you
Yeah.
pleasure? What would bring you joy? What would bring you, some kind of satisfaction, some kind of adventure, some kind of curiosity, right? Like show up for those parts. Your father, you know how to show up for your father, right? What about these other parts that we
Yeah.
show up and we
Yeah.
say, no, I don't want to play, or no, I don't want to be curious, or no, I don't want to explore, or no, I don't want pleasure. Pleasure's for children, play's for children. Not true, right? So we were talking and he shared, well, actually, there is this wine tasting course that I've been taking and I really love it, right? And a sommelier.
Yeah.
right? We took the certificate. I took it with my wife. It was just so much fun, you know? And he says, and there was a part of me that was like, what if this was my job? And I was like, well, isn't that interesting, right?
Yeah. Wow,
That
beautiful.
right now
Yeah.
you have this window, this very rare window, right? Because the default option is you find another consulting thing and you go back, and then this little bit of pleasure that you have disappears again, right? And I,
Yeah.
kind of helped him see that here's something that you are really excited about, right? And that it doesn't have to just be a hobby either, I could see that something in his mind kind of
Yeah.
like changed. Again, this is a highly productive person, right, in the professional sphere. But once they saw this different life, right, I could see that in their mind they immediately started building a pathway to it, right? Like I didn't need to do that work with them, right? And he was like, what he said was something like, huh, interesting, but the wheels are turning, And he was
Yeah.
like, yeah, great, thanks. He basically was like, okay, we're done, because, and I would love to catch up with,
Yeah.
yeah, this new
Because
pathway opened up.
yeah, yeah, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. Actually, this yeah, like it's amazing. Like, how he found out a different path altogether. And also, because, where you mentioned that the voice in his head is of his father's, where, he just, listens that, he says that, you have to work. Actually, there's this misconception, that I would like to, because
Please,
I just,
please
would like to
share.
add
Yeah.
my 2 cents, which is I think our parents, they wants, best for us, but they do not know what is best for us. I think these are two very different things. They definitely, wants us to do good in our lives, but it is not necessary that they know what is good for us. And in fact, 95 out of 100 times they do
Yeah.
not know what is good for us. So I think, yeah,
No, I think
again, this is just my personal opinion,
it's
that these are
the
very
story
two
for
very
many of us. Yeah.
things.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So, okay. Yeah. Yeah. So my next question is, because, in in this last conversation, sorry, in this, while you were talking about your client's journey, you
Mm,
talked about safety. So speaking of
mm.
emotional safety, how do we build that in friendship, work, or relationships? I think because that is very important. These are the places where we spend our most of the time
Yeah.
and these things. So how do we build that in these relationships?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think it's a really important question, and certainly in a coaching context, that's a big part of the work. And, I think the way that we build emotional safety, sometimes we say psychological safety, which is, related, looks different, I would say, in interpersonal relationships, let's say in a coaching relationship, and in a professional setting, right? It used to be popular not so long ago to say, for instance, bring your whole self to work. Have you heard this expression, right? You hear it
Yeah,
less
yeah,
now.
yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah,
Work
right,
is
right, right,
family
right.
and this and that.
You
Really?
hear it less now, and I think, but it's always been a little bit confusing to me also, just what that means exactly, right? Because in times when I have showed more of how I feel in a work setting, what I see is that it's often not very well received. Sometimes people feel threatened by it. Sometimes people don't know exactly what to do with it. If I express, let's say, disappointment with a senior manager, they might perceive it as offense, right? So right, so that's a setting where I
Yeah,
would
yeah,
say there
yeah,
is not emotional safety. At the same time, I think it's a fair question to ask of whether expressing disappointment with a manager has a place in the workplace in the first place. I don't know the answer to that, but not everyone agrees that it does, right? And so then if not everyone agrees, then I don't want to bring that to that
yeah,
workplace, right? Because it won't be received well and it will affect me negatively.
yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah,
I think the setting matters. Maybe I'll just leave that there. I think
yeah,
within a coaching
yeah,
dynamic, right? Yeah, kind of one important principle that I use to establish it, and it takes time, is just affirming. right? And affirming and inviting also. So saying things like, it's okay to share, to tell me how you feel, right? There is no wrong feeling. All feelings are valid, right? So just doing this kind of continuous work of opening, inviting, affirming, validating, right? I want to be also like kind of clear here that affirming someone's feelings is not the same as saying, acted appropriately in some particular situation, right? That's different. And I
Yeah.
think as coaches,
Yeah.
part of
Yeah.
our kind of responsibility to our clients is to hold them accountable for actions and for the consequences of their actions, right? But feelings are just that, I like the thing that I like to remind my clients is that feelings are information, right? And feelings and as information, yeah, right?
Feelings are
In other
information.
words, something happens to us in our outside world, we perceive it, and then we have a feeling about it, right? So that feeling isn't right or wrong. It's information about what happened and
Yeah.
what that means for us, right? So if I feel scared, for instance, fear carries very important
Yeah.
information, right?
Yeah.
I'm not,
Yeah.
some people say, overcome your fear, suppress your fear, right? I think that's like, that's like being in your, the corporate boardroom of your mind, right? And you have your chief security
Yeah.
officer
Yeah.
comes into the boardroom and says, "Hey, there's a very serious risk. Someone's trying
Yeah.
to compromise us," right? And so
Yeah.
overcoming our fear means we tell that security officer to go away. We're going to keep moving and ignore this information, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
for me, the more appropriate guidance around fear, as an example, is let's not, allow ourselves to be ruled by our fear, right? But we need to be attentive and we need to be in communication and we need to be in a very kind of, I would say, close relationship with our fear, but with the rest of our emotions as well,
Yeah.
with our anger, with our joy, with our curiosity, right? The good ones and the bad ones. And as we were kind of talking about before, right? Like, and if like our parents are one big source of influence on how we kind of receive our emotions, right? The other one is our workplace. Our workplace, right? Also kind of makes us feel and think that our emotions don't matter or are not relevant. I was watching an executive coaching video recently, how to speak like an executive. And one of the pieces of guidance this teacher had was to not be
Yeah.
emotional, right? And I mean, I understand that to some extent,
Wow.
right? Her position was that if you want to be credible and you want people to believe you, that bringing
Yeah.
emotions into it will kind of compromise your credibility. And so, yes, in certain settings, like if I'm showing up to support someone in a crisis, right? Let's say someone is having some kind of a very deep
Yeah.
emotional
Yeah.
traumatic crisis. So if I show up in that setting, I agree that in the work that I'm there to do, it is important for me to manage my own emotions, right? Because if my emotions get into that conversation, then I can't be a source of strength and support for that person, right? But that's different than saying, let's completely ignore all of our emotions all the time. And so in the coaching
Yeah.
setting, as the coach, again, I am there to support someone else. The feelings that I might be having, a client might say something, that to me, I'm like maybe judging, or, maybe they share a situation with me that makes me scared myself, right? Oh my God, I don't know how you did that, right? As a coach,
Yeah.
part of the work that I'm doing and holding space for my clients is receiving that information, right? And sort of like telling myself, let's talk about it later, right?
Yeah.
There's awareness, but I also have to have discipline to not bring it into the
Yeah.
conversation space. On the other hand, with my clients, it's so much of the work is about connecting and actually listening to those voices and to those advisors that we call emotions and that information, right?
Yeah.
And it's not just
Yeah.
for let's talk about
Yeah.
emotions because emotions are
Yeah.
cool or emotions are fun, and they're not. Um, but because those emotions are those emotions are they have a lot of influence, right? Like we talked about fear coming into the boardroom of our mind, right? Whether or not we let that emotion or
Yeah.
sadness in, they still have influence, right?
Yeah.
And we
Yeah.
get exactly impact, and
Impact.
we get really in
True.
trouble when we don't listen to those voices, right? And we don't listen to those voices because of all this messaging that we get about emotions, right? And
Yeah.
so, and then people wonder, why am I stuck, right? I know that I'm supposed to, get a work towards a promotion or triple my income. But
Yeah.
when I try to, rewrite my resume, I just can't do it.
You're not
Sometimes you see people are stuck in
helping.
taking certain action, and they think, oh, I'm not ambitious enough or I'm not motivated enough, right? Meanwhile, there's feelings
Yeah.
that are there. Often it's fear, right? That is
Yeah.
sending us messages, right? You know that if you get this promotion, you're going to have to work more and you'll be away from your family more, right? That information is still coming in and we're not acknowledging it, but it's affecting us. It's slowing us down, right? It's just like putting the brakes on our system. And so, in coaching work, this is why it's important to make space for those voices, for those parts of ourselves, right? Because
Yeah.
we have to
Yeah.
enter into a relationship with that voice, right? Well, what is exactly the fear? Well, it's the fact that I will be working more, right? And okay, well, so
Yeah.
why do we want the promotion in the first place? Oh, well, it's because I actually want more time
Yeah.
to myself. Well, if that's what we want, maybe it's not a promotion we want. Maybe it's a different, a lateral shift or something like that, right? And then they go, oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And then suddenly the motivation appears, right? Not because
Yeah.
we overcame our fear, but because we listened to the message that
Yeah.
fear had for us, right? And so you kind of bring this example up just to make the case for the importance of creating a safe space for a conversation with our own feelings. A methodology that I use with clients, it's called internal family systems, IFS. It's a
Internal
methodology used
systems. Okay.
in therapeutic work, and now it's becoming more and more kind of popular because it's so effective in coaching spaces as well, because it helps clients to recognize the kind of the voices, the parts of ourselves, the managers, so to speak, right? The executives
Yeah. Yeah.
of our executive board,
Yeah.
whose job really is to
Yeah.
keep us safe. And keeping us safe often looks like keeping things as they are. And so if we want people to make change, then it is absolutely, I would say a foundational part of the work to create a space of emotional safety. And yeah, and so for people who are coming
Emotions.
maybe from these kinds of executive positions where you're not supposed to get emotional. I have to,
Yeah.
do a little bit of work with folks to create a different kind of space that they're not used to, but where they feel safe. We're saying, I am
Yeah.
afraid. And that is not going to diminish
Yeah.
them. It's not going to punish them. I am uncertain, right? Doubt comes up sometimes for us, right? Doubt is a really
Yeah.
beautiful space to be in. This or that, I don't know, right? It's okay to not know. You're not an executive here. You're just a human trying to figure out what the next thing is. Yeah, so the importance of it is I would say foundational, and using internal family systems, or sometimes we call it parts work, helping a client see the different parts of themselves and to come into acceptance of all those different parts. Yeah, it's okay to not know. It's okay to be afraid. It's okay to be angry also, right? Anger has important information. Let's talk about it. What is the
Angry.
anger telling you, right? What was the violation? Sounds like this is an important boundary for you, right? And they go, oh, important information. Now I know to protect this boundary, for instance, right? Versus just being in my
Yeah.
anger. Yeah. So to answer your question, like, how do we do that? By continuously kind of affirming and protecting that space. It's okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Affirming. Yeah. Yeah. Sounds beautiful. Okay, so a few days ago, I saw your LinkedIn post on this push
Mm.
to pull method. Can you please explain what that means
Mm.
and how it changed your work? Because I really, personally, I
Thank
really love
you.
that
Yeah,
post.
for your listeners, maybe, right, I wrote about, how in my work I am seeing a kind of change where when I started kind of putting myself out there, it felt very, pushy, right? And right, and we use that
Yeah,
word in many different ways. And, in marketing, it's even a term, push marketing, push notification, right?
yeah,
And so in
yeah,
all
yeah,
of those ways of
yeah,
using that term, there's the kind of, the common meaning is like pushing onto you, right? At you, right? You didn't ask for it, but here it is. And sometimes, in business, in promotion, we find ourselves like kind of pushing
yeah,
ourselves, right? And our offerings and whatever onto
yeah,
our customers, our audiences, whatever. Look at me, listen to me, come to me, right? Here I am. And yeah, I think some of us are more comfortable with that also, I think, than others. What I started to see and what I observed in the post you're talking about is a shift in how my audience has been responding to me, where
yeah,
now I see more pull, right? And what I mean by pull is now people are asking me, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Well,
Because they're
that's a
intrigued.
beautiful read. Thank you. Yeah, I love intrigue. People are
Yeah.
interested. And also, how I understand it is that there's something that's resonating, right? I sometimes get,
Yeah.
private messages in response to some of my posts that say, this is a pattern, and it's a really beautiful pattern where people write in and they will say, Misha, I really love what you post, because it is so different than everything else, and it is just about kindness, and it is so affirming, and it
Yeah,
shows up in care, right? And thank you is a kind of message that I receive
yeah,
every once in a while. Part of what I see in the poll is that something is connecting with people, right? And then there'll be a second part to that message. I really like what you're posting. How can we work together? In other
together.
words, like, how can I have a piece of this energy? Yeah.
Yeah, essence.
Right. And
Yeah,
so
yeah, yeah, yeah.
from,
Yeah.
an entrepreneurial, right, like perspective, you relate, I'm sure, right? You're building a personal brand. You're trying to, I think, right, figure out what, so many of us, right, especially who are working in freelance kind of spaces, are trying to figure out, well, what does my business look like? There's no rules necessarily, right? And so for me, it's really beautiful and exciting when people come to me and they say, whatever this thing is that you're doing, coaching, life design, intentional living, all the different things, like maybe I want that also. Um, can I have? And so that becomes the pull.
Yeah.
For me, part of what I reflected on is that it's like earlier we were talking about sort of this personal growth framework, from servitude to self-ownership to service, right? When I start to see this kind of pull, to me, that is also a little bit of an indication that I'm, at least in those areas of my life, I'm stepping into service, right? And I think one of the ways that we can recognize service is when our communities, our audiences start telling us what you're doing is valuable. Can I have, right?
Is value.
And so for my work, that's for me
Yeah.
absolutely the goal, even from a business building perspective, right? If the work feels like I'm
Of course.
constantly
Of course.
trying to convince people that what I'm doing is of value, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Then I wonder if it actually is, and I don't like
Yeah.
fighting people, I want to truly serve.
Yeah.
When people are
Yeah.
coming to me and
Yeah. Yeah.
saying, I don't even know exactly what the offering is, Misha, but make me a proposal, right?
Make
And I
me
see that
wow.
now coming a little bit from some organizational leaders, right? Misha, I see that you work with people one on one. My team, we're struggling to connect with each other. What might a series of workshops look
Yeah,
like or something
amazing.
like that, right? So pull. And so that work looks very different because people see me for what I do, right? And it's just a much more authentic kind of way of being with my community. Yeah. So as a business coach, no one's asking me to be their business coach, but unsolicited business advice is how can we, right, put ourselves in places where we're truly serving our communities? And the way we will know that is when our communities start coming to us and saying, please, please serve.
Yeah, please. I really, I love that post because on so many level, I resonated with what you wrote because I believe in similar,
Ethic.
what do you call?
Yeah.
So yeah, I really, yeah, like love that post. Okay, so now now we are at my last question, which is, what has life taught you about moving forward, not by force,
Yeah.
but by
By
listening?
learning.
Not by listening, because as
Mm,
a coach, you keep listening to so many people,
mm,
their pains, their
mm,
sorrow, that they are stuck. What
mhm.
has life taught you like,
Yeah. Thank you.
about moving
Yeah.
forward?
Well, so many things. And and one of the things I think is to stay open, a very wise teacher of mine, recently put it so simply, but it really resonated, right? That I think he said, you know, pain is a part of life, but suffering is optional.
Yeah.
You understand? We,
Pain is,
yeah,
yeah, I understand, but I would
yeah,
love if you could,
right. In other words,
elaborate on it.
pain is what happens, right? When we get struck by an arrow, right? When we get rejected, when a relative passes, right? We feel pain. But pain is different from suffering. Right? Suffering comes um when we refuse to accept the pain, right? In other words, we can feel the pain, and even in feeling the pain, we can find ourselves in a place of acceptance. And even in
Yeah.
a place of acceptance of pain, I think it's possible for us to find a kind of pleasure, right? And even like almost like a
Yeah.
wonder, a marvel, right? That if whatever, sometimes people call it a simulation or, the movie of my life or something, right? How incredible is it that yesterday I can feel the pure joy of swimming in a lake, on a summer day, and then the next day feel the grief of losing a loved
Yeah.
one, right? It's not that to me, that one is
Yeah.
an absolute good and the other is an absolute bad, but it's the fact that in this life, in this body, in this mind, in this soul, I can feel all of that. And all of that is available to me in this experience of existence.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
that is where the suffering is optional, right? Something bad happens. Of course, I want to be completely present for it, right? And to feel the pain. But in
Yeah.
feeling the pain, it need not be suffering, right? It can also be presence. It can be an honoring, right? There's so many ways that we can show up for pain. And so that's, I think
Yeah.
one lesson. And I think to your question, like what is kind of the one thing that I've learned from listening is just yeah, holding space, really holding space for all of those experiences. When clients come to me and sometimes, yeah, they're in very, very difficult places, very dark places. At the end of those sessions, I think to myself, just yeah, what an incredible gift I am receiving, by just
Yeah.
having the capacity to show up for the pain of others. And I can see that it's healing, like I've had sessions where clients come and they're just in such
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
tight, strict, painful place. The whole session is just them sharing and emoting and crying. I'm not doing any coaching. What we talked about a minute ago, affirming, the term I like to use is holding space. The space is secure for honesty, for authenticity. And then whatever the hour will end, right? And there was not, any kind of coaching. What do you think you should do? What's next? On a scale of 1 to 10, how satisfied? There's none of that. There's
Yeah.
just, I see you, I hear you, I feel
Yeah.
you. And so
Yeah.
for me, that is
Yeah.
probably just an enormous privilege, in this work, and something that I'm so grateful for. But for my clients, I also see that just even in that is relief, is recognition, is healing, is, validation, right? Like, oh, this is happening to me. It is real, and it's okay also, right? Because here's another person
Yeah.
who received
Yeah.
me in it and
Yeah.
didn't shame me for it and didn't punish me for it, and they just held space. And so that, I think, is, for me, I mean, it's the greatest gift, it's the greatest honor, it's, I think, probably the most important lesson, and it's the most, I think, useful teaching. I think if, we could all do better at this, of just holding space. And so if that's one thing I
100%.
could have my clients leave with some of these conversations, that just our compassion for ourselves, for each other, to hold space in the fullness of our humanity, um, then yeah, then I feel like, this is the work that we are to be doing.
Oh, that was so beautiful. If because we talked about how you transformed people's lives, not by basically advising them on what to do and what not to do, but
Yeah.
simply asking them questions or helping them reach where they are able to find the answers within which was somewhere lying within them. So I think that's the most, I would say, beautiful thing that you do. And whether we realize it or not, especially in this day and age, we require more people like, who can basically help individuals and organizations on a basically this healing on a big level, or not only on surface level,
Yeah.
but something that goes beyond the surface level. And if any buddy would want to reach out to you, reach you out, reach out to you, how
Yeah,
can what are the
sure. The
mediums
best
where
way
they
is
can
to
contact you?
email me directly. Um, the email for my coaching studio is Misha at speakhuman.studio. And maybe we can add that below. So that's my coaching practice, and that's my
Yeah.
organizational culture practice. They can also connect with me. We run a wellness studio in Ridgewood in Queens in New York City here. The name of that studio is the Queen's Well, and yeah, and so
Wow.
we do. Thank you. Yeah, we
I love the
do,
name.
in-person programming, because I think gathering in community is just also, a part of this work, right? We need to find space to be together and to hold space for each other. And so the Queen's Well is that piece of that mission for me. And so you can
It's
connect with
beautiful.
the Queen's Well via our Instagram at the Queen's Well. Yeah. And you can connect with
Instagram.
me on
Yeah.
LinkedIn too. I'm quite responsive on
Okay.
there as well. And yeah, as I mentioned earlier, for folks who might be struggling, as maybe they're noticing that they need to make a change, or they're noticing that changes are just kind of moving through them and they're a little bit feeling under-equipped, please connect with me. This work is something that is very, very important to me, and something that I bring all of myself to, and I would love to support folks through big, important changes. Yeah, thank you. Of
Sounds perfect. I'll put in the CTA. And thank you so much,
course,
Misha. Thank you
appreciate
for
it.
coming to the show. It was lovely speaking with you.
Yeah, really appreciated.